So this talk's going to be about my experiences with test automation, but also what I've seen people in the industry doing and talking about when they talk about test automation. So as Simon said, my name is Richard Bradshaw. I live in the UK, currently working in London as a contract/consultant. So actually, first things first, I need to apologise for my grammar. Apparently that should say fewer testers, but I'm terrible with words anyway. So when I originally sent the proposal in, I meant the word test automation really to mean automated testing or the ability to automate a test. So that's the context for the start of the talk, but we'll explore other definitions as we go through. So then like I said in there, we've got less testers. So the holy grail is that we have all our machines running all our tests for us, and then we don't need people anymore. Or it's faster because computers are really fast, and they only know what to do. They only know what you tell them to do, so they just get on and do it. And then the final one was added because I'm just seeing a lot of people now thinking that all they need to do is test automation and exploratory testing and everything's done. We don't need to do anything else, which I think is one of the dangers. I think that's going to become more prominent over the next year or so. I also want to quickly say hello to Nottingham. So at the moment, my local meetup in Nottingham is currently streaming my talk there. So hello, Nottingham. Oh, there we go. So one of the definitions, when I tried to find a definition as in for what I meant when I put this talk forward for test automation, so I've gone with the fantastic ISTQB. They provided me with one. So there's something in this definition that really threw me off. So the use of software to perform or support test activities, test management, test design, or test execution, and results checking. So I underlined some of the words that I found that jumped out at me. So we've got perform, which to me, obviously you're in James Back's keynote earlier, a computer having the ability to perform. Not really sure that computers can do that yet. Test execution, again, they can't really execute tests. And then we've got the word checking at the end, which I'm hopefully going to come back to and try and tie these together. Oh, there we go. Yep. So based on that definition, test automation doesn't exist, if that's the definition that you're working to. We'll hopefully elaborate that as we go through the talk. But in my view, you can't automate a test. It's just a test. To do a test, you need to perform some activities. You need to run some experiments. You need to observe the behavior and then do analysis on it. And computers just can't do that. So that's it. That's great. Thanks for coming. No, we're going to elaborate a little more. But does test automation exist? There's a few other definitions out there that I came across when I was researching this talk. So we'll have a look at a few of those as well. So this is one that Michael Bolton gave me in a Skype conversation prepping for this talk. He says test automation is the use of any hardware or software to support testing. I actually agree with the words that are there, but the name they're associated to, I'm not convinced yet. But we'll come to that as well, hopefully. But I did ask several people as well what their definitions were. So we had the ISTQB one, we've had the one from Michael. And the favorite word that always comes up is regression. We use automated testing to do all our regression. And having automation just to do your regression is a dangerous game. You should really be trying to do the regression as you're going through the testing. Don't just build a set of automation to try and protect you against regression. So we're going to carry on through the talks using the ISTQB definition for now, and we're going to kind of jump back to the one that Michael's provided as well, as the one hopefully I'll give you at the end. So less testers. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? If we don't need all these people, then obviously our wages are lower, probably need less office space, probably a manager's dream. And unfortunately, there is people out there marketing this. There is tool vendors who say this on their site. They don't say less people or fewer people. but they do highly mention about reduced cost and overheads, which I think they've wrapped people into. Sorry, there's a light delay on my machine. There we go. So how is this overall theory meant to work? So we get some automation in. Obviously, to them, it's like some thinking thing that can do testing, so obviously it needs some breathing holes at the top. We don't want it to die on the way. And then we start automating all our testing. It sounds fantastic. And we automate all our tests, and it's going really well. We've got a full suite going, and we're running them all the time. It's so effective that Mr. Manager down here comes along and says, all right, we're getting rid of, you can't really probably read it, but we're getting rid of John and Amy. We don't need them anymore. All our testing's automated. So yeah, the management's over the moon. We've got rid of 2 people, and all our automation's on the go. But a common thing I always see is we end up with more bugs in live, potentially. So we end up with a bad test report. And then, you know, the testers who are left, they start complaining, well, you got rid of all our testers. You know, what do you want me to do? So what's the actual problem we've happened here? We've brought automation in, we've replaced our testers, but our quality has appeared to have gone down. So a few observations that I would say is that we've reduced the opportunities for observation. So we've removed some humans out of the equation. So we're doing less observation of the actual application and the test. We've stopped using our best tool. The best testing tool that exists is the human brain. And in this particular story, we've lost 2. So we've reduced the testing and potentially stopped testing. And there's a quote in Perfect Software by Jerry Weinberg that says we must muster all the brains you can to help you test. But in this instance, we've got rid of them. And it's because automation can't make observations. It can only bring you back what you told it to. It can only observe what you've already observed yourself. And you've told it to just carry on doing it. So in that instance, the computer can't learn. Automation has no mind, it's mindless. So therefore, if you're going to rely on your automation, you're going to make less observations, and you're going to provide less information for your business. So this is what I believe automation can do. So this is the references from Testing and Checking Redefined by Michael Bolton and James Back. So again, I'm not going to read them out to you. You can probably read them. But it actually took me a while to get my head around this. I first got introduced to this doing RST last year in March. I didn't quite get it at first, but now I've looked at it a bit more, and it's becoming a lot clearer. So we have the distinction from what a machine can do, and they call it checking, and I'm using the same terminology. I call it checking as well. And checking, in this instance, it can only provide you with information that you've already got. It's if you've done a load of testing in the first place and you've collated this information, you've collated these facts, and now you're just asking the machine to check that they're still valid. So the only information you ever get when you run your automation is that nothing's changed. Things are still the same. And if any of you are using testing as you should to make inferred decisions about your product, then that information is not much use to you. So, do I believe that automation will, result in less testers? Unfortunately, no, I don't. Unless I got quite a good quote from Dorothy Graham, who's really good, got some really good work on automation, and she says automation can only replace your testers if you're testless and mindless morons. I doubt there's any mindless morons in this room, or even in your organizations. There might be the odd person who prefers to do checking all the time instead of testing, but as we'll probably hopefully come to discover, he's probably not doing checking all the time, because it's very hard for a human just to do checking. So I think the solution to this problem is why people think automation is going to be less people, is education. And I think we need to start with testers. Even if you don't want to use the exact words of checking and testing, we need to start making clear distinctions between the difference of what a human can do and what a computer can do. And testers themselves need to get a mutual understanding. And then we need to take that forward to managers and start educating them on the distinction that we're having, so they can really see the value of what automation can provide, but also the value of what real human testing can do. Sorry, one sec. So yeah, so once I've had experience of doing this, and it's one of the first things I do now when I join a team and they start talking about automation, I go, well, of course we can introduce some automation. We'll introduce some automated checks, and I explain to them the difference of what they do. And I said, I want to spend my time doing intelligent investigations. I want to spend my time delivering you new, useful information, but I do understand the importance of checking at the same time. But if we're going to take the original definition, the second definition from Michael, if we're going to say that automation is a tool, then obviously less testers doesn't make sense. So who's going to use the tool? If there's less testers in the room, no one's going to use the tool. So less testers is not a goal or an objective of introducing automation. So the next one on the list was faster testing. Obviously, everyone wants to do faster testing. Deadlines are really tight these days. Things are moving really quickly. And it's just the way things are moving. So let's continue the story of the little man and the little woman and man. Has that moved? No. So once you've introduced this automation, most people think that it's going to go in some kind of like a bell shape. So you spend a lot of time introducing automation, and then eventually the time you spend on it goes down, and it's just happily sat there running away. But it's complete nonsense. Automation can be a really heavy overhead. You can spend a lot of your time updating your automation, because as we said, the automation is mindless. It can't adapt or learn from what's going on around it. So when something does change in the application, we basically need to teach it again. And again, that means it's going to involve your time of updating it. But for me, instead of that bell shape, the actual path of automation is a bit like a delayed heartbeat. It's like the automation's alive, it then dies, we then give it a little bit of a shock, and it comes back alive again, and it just ends up constantly going like this, if you view it as automated testing. So these are all the things that, well, there's a lot more than this, but these are a few of the things that go wrong once you've got your automation, automated checking or testing in place. Your environments will probably change, they'll move around. Locators on web pages are a huge problem, especially if you're on a web page that's always evolving its design or layout. Endpoints change, new APIs come out, and you need to update your data to now, so you need to update your automation code to use these new endpoints. Data is a huge problem in automation. It's constantly changing, you constantly need to write new ones, people delete your data, you need to insert your data back in again. Responses change. If you're doing automation on like an API level, new status codes gets introduced, new error messages get introduced, and you need to update them. Application flow is a huge one. Applications are changing all the time. People are introducing new pages. They're trying to make the user experience more fluid, say, and if that's going to happen, you've got to update your automation, because again, it can't learn that something's changed. And you spend a lot of time with CI. CI is great once you've got it up and running and configured, but to try and get to that point, it can be tricky when you've got lots of libraries in your code that you're trying to pull information from and put in the right place in the first place. And then you've got exactly what we said. You've got new checks. The application's going to continue to grow. You're going to have to produce new checks, and you're also going to have to delete old checks. But one thing that I think often goes underlooked is as you are creating or you're maintaining your automation suite or creating new checks and editing old checks, you do actually do some testing whilst you're doing that. I don't believe you can add in new checks you shouldn't add in new checks without looking at the application in the first place, because you need to find out what it does do so you can transfer that into the code. So there is an element of testing as you are creating new automated checks. And then faster testing. So how many people have said this? I've said this a lot earlier in my career. So I would have done, let's say, a few hours of testing, but we had an automated suite that took like 5 hours to run. So it's not saving me any time. I've done the testing that I wanted to work on, and then someone's gone, oh, but we need to run the regression. Oh, well, the regression takes 5 hours. Oh, well, we're just going to have to run it. So you finish your testing, but then you don't sit there, but it's 3 hours until you can tell the business that everything's okay, if that's the approach you want to take. And then we've got the thing that we just went through. So did the test automation actually do any testing? So if we're talking about faster testing from the ISTQB definition, and the one I used about test automation being automated testing, it's not actually done any testing. So how can we have done faster testing if we actually haven't done any testing at all? So if your approach to testing is to just do checking, then this will probably work for you if you do follow some solid design principles for writing automation. But I don't believe many businesses around here are happy with their testers just doing checking. You're not going to be providing much new information for them to help them make the decisions that businesses want and the information that stakeholders are seeking. Again, like we said, the only information you're going to get from this type of automation is that nothing's changed, it's still the same. It's just simply not enough to work with. So what about the other definition for automation being a tool to speed up testing? It definitely should. But again, it depends how you design and maintain your tools. If you are going to have a heavy influence of automation in your company, you really need to get developers or people who are really experienced in code helping you. If you just try and get a tester to go and learn some code, they'll get you so far. I'm quite good at writing automated checking code, but that's because I've been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years. Whereas if you've just got a tester who's just come in or relatively new, they need that bit of developer knowledge. So pairing is really good if you want to try and write tools to really help your testing. Go and pair with developers to help you produce tools that can really help your testing go faster. But hopefully we'll try and recap there at the end. So this is, like I said, this is a bit of a warning because I've heard this a lot in the last few organizations. If we've got all this automated checking or even testing in this instance, if you've got all this in place, like the only thing I need to do now is exploratory testing. And again, it's not a terrible approach. It's probably a lot better than some organizations are doing. But there's a lot more you can do with your time. Exploratory testing is a great way of finding information, but then so is building relationships with other members of the business, other members of the team. So is going and pairing with the developer for a few hours, watching him code or getting him to run you through the code of the application. So in this instance, it's more of if you can use automation as a tool or you use it to do your check-in, the rest of the time you have is great, but just don't start focusing on ET. It's like I said, it's a good use of your time, but there's also a lot more you can be doing with your time. So yeah, these are some of the things that you can do. So people mentioned it earlier. I was in Alexandra Kasapu's talk where she said that she was working with a client in Finland, where in the summer they take long vacations. So she had a lot of the time on the hand to learn new skills. But again, using automated checking or automation in an efficient way, and will give you that more time to learn some new skills, build relationships, as we mentioned. Start getting involved earlier on. I still speak to a lot of testers at conferences who aren't involved until the requirements are already written. Why do those requirements exist? What was the reason why someone wrote down those requirements that have just been presented to you? Try and get involved earlier on, and you can do that by building relationships. But you can also do that by the definitions of checking and testing. Once people know what testing is, once you've told the business the difference, they'll want you involved earlier on, because you can start actually testing them. It doesn't always have to be about the product. It can be about them and their ideas. You've got to maintain your automation. Like we mentioned earlier, it changes a lot, but also as your skills evolve, you'll learn new design patterns that you want to apply to your automation, and also design new automation. The types that I'll hopefully show you in a few minutes. So on those definitions, I think we've got a huge bit of a gulf at the moment where people do believe that you can automate testing. People believe that there's huge value to gain from having an automated testing approach. But again, It's not possible for me. I really don't believe it is. You can automate your check-in, and it's fantastic. Check-in is very important. It needs to be done. But you also need to, you also, I can't remember, so move on. So the definition for test automation that Michael gave us, I do want to use this word, these words. I think they are perfectly accurate. Automation is tools to support testing. But I don't like the name. As we've just discovered, the word test automation, it's got a tarnished meaning in industry. If people I spoke to when I was trying to get definitions for test automation, anyone outside of the context-driven community I spoke to, their first words were automated testing, regression testing, the things that I've just said you can't do. But they meant it as automated testing, as it's providing us loads of value over there. So I recently did a podcast with STP with Mark Tomlinson, and it was about ways of using automation in a team that are away from checking and other ways you can use automation. And he kept asking me for a title. I really couldn't think of one. But in the end, I came along, I used automation in testing. And then, bizarrely, I spoke to James back the last week before the conference, and he said exactly the same words. And then he used it in his talk yesterday as well. So I think there is some real value in this, in using this words, because we've flipped it around now. We're saying that automation can exist as part of testing. We're not saying that a test is going to be automated. I think just a small flip of words opens up a whole new avenue for automation in testing. I'd recommend listening to the podcast as well. Just a little plug for myself. Oh, come on. So I want to stick with the same definition, but I like to just simplify it a little bit and just say automation is just a tool. Like we said already, it's mindless. It can't think. It can only do what you tell it to do. We need to provide the mind. So if you think about it that way, if we were provided the mind all the time and we were using that automation as tools, we can get a lot more out of them than we can just by going, here's a piece of my mind, go over there, and just sit away doing what you do. So I think there's a whole new avenue for automation. So I just want to now go through like an example which I reckon most people who even if they thought they were doing automated testing, they will have this kind of setup in their company, and I want to show how we can utilize those things to get more out of automation. So this would be my a good approach to designing an automated check. So you're going to have some kind of data builder that's going to build you test data in your environment and delete that data down. You're going to have some kind of driver factory, which is going to produce the driver to drive your automation, the software you're going to use, so be it a browser or desktop application. So you're going to have that in place already. I'm a big advocate of the page object pattern. So if anyone does do automation, the page object pattern, I've got a very detailed breakdown of it on my blog, which is I'd recommend reading. So most people would go down the page object pattern route. And then most people, they build a lot of utilities to help them with their automation. So things like taking screenshots when checks fail. If anyone's ever used someone like Source Labs, they record all the automated testing. So we've done a bit of that on one of our local stacks. And we started doing some work on Android where you can record the Android devices you're running automation. And then the other one is just like dumps. So I mean that in terms of like log files and things like that. So when your automation fails and you've got a system that's got a lot of log files, you write some code to just go and grab them. Go and grab them all and dump them out somewhere. This would be a good approach to writing an automated check. But the issue, so this is what most people would have. But you still, like I said earlier, you still need people with a high level of coding skills to produce this. So again, I encourage you to pair with developers to help you write a check framework in such a way. So if you had such a framework, for me, Like I said, checking is a part of testing. It needs to be done. So writing your automation in this way, for me, it gives you a more maintainable thing and allow you to get more out of your automation. But also, even if you do have this, you're still going to have to maintain it. So don't become dependent on it. A lot of people talking about regression testing. People write, so they do all their exploratory testing, and then we go, oh, we're just going to go and run all our automation. And as we mentioned, it can take a lot longer. So we need to start using these checks more in line with the testing we want to do. So as you're thinking of what you want to test, you should also be thinking about areas of regression and probably do some testing on those areas as well, but then selectively pick the automated checks that you want to run. So as I said, don't just build it and put it on the side and just let it keep running whenever you want it to. Use parts of it when you feel you need to. If it is fast, if you're able to have a suite of checks that run in, I would probably say less than 15 minutes, then run them all. But if not, use it as a tool. Think about what areas you want to look at a regression. Think about what areas you think will still need checking, and then selectively pick the ones. Otherwise, you're always going to be waiting for your automation to finish, and it's not going to speed you up. So if we take the test framework away, the test framework, I don't think we're going to be able to get away with that, because in the programming world, they still like to call them test frameworks. I did actually download NUnit and change test to check and recompiled it. And it did actually build, but I don't think I'll be able to maintain it for it to catch on with them updating it as well. But anyway, if we take the test framework away, then we're left with the 4 elements that we've built to enable us to do automated checking. And we can utilize all these now to really support our testing. So we've got the data builder. You just need a way of driving it. So before we were using the test framework to drive the data builder, you could just write a quick program to use that code already. It could just be a big script, or it could just be a really simple interface with a button on it if you're in the Microsoft world. But now you've opened yourself up to be able to create data really quickly with code that you've already written to do your automated checking. So when you are doing a session, an exploratory testing session perhaps, and obviously you're going to need data in your system, you can utilize code you've already written to help you produce data to go in your session. And then we've got the elements, so we've got the driver, the page object, and the utilities. Again, we've removed the need of educating the automation. So now we've just left with some tools. So we can utilize the driver factory, the page objects, and the utilities just to go and get some stuff for me. Just go and get some pages from the application, take screenshots for me and dump them somewhere. We tried this at an organization where the automation overnight would take, I think it was about 20 screenshots and put them on a drive. And at the end of the stand-up every morning, it was the different person's responsibility to look at all the screenshots. So they had like a few minutes at the end of the stand-up just to click through all the screenshots looking for anomalies or something that jumps out of them, i.e. bugs. And doing that meant that it was always a different person. Well, not always, obviously, it was in a cycle, but it was always useful, and it was a different set of eyes instead of just telling the automation what to always look for. But you can also use this, a tester from the UK called Matt Archer. He was using a really data-heavy application with lots of tables in it. And if anyone's ever tried automating a table, it gets quite cumbersome, especially when you want to try and find a certain row. So what he changed it, and in the end he just wrote the code to go to that page and download the table, styled it in a bit of report, in a better looking report, and then published that report into a shared place where then someone could then go and open that report and test it. So he got the automation to do the legwork for him. So again, that's a really good use. If you do have a data-heavy environment, use automation to do the legwork for you. Use it as a tool. And then the other one is that, again, I mentioned it, sessions for, if you're doing exploratory testing, I've had an application before where I always needed to be on like step 4. So using the checks that are using the driver factory page object, I was able to create 20 instances of the application, navigate me to a certain page, and then I can start my session from there. So it saved me a few minutes of logging in, navigating to the certain page that I want to be at. Just so again, every time I'm doing that, most people are doing some kind of, if you are doing testing, then you will find yourself going backwards and forwards, opening up new browsers, killing the session. This just left me with 20 ready to go. And if you're using a browser that doesn't cross the cookies and things like that, then there's no crossover. So you just basically just created yourself 20 instances. So again, this is, if people believe that automation is test automation or just check automation, you always end up with this. This is exactly how people view it. They don't realize that the bits in the middle are really useful to you. You can really harness the bit in the middle. And another thing about this is, all this is code, whether it's a developer or a testers wrote this. Now we've removed the test out of the way, or the test framework out of the way. Testers will realize that they actually do have the ability to create new applications for themselves that are automation, using the code that they've already learned. Common ones are parsing log files. Has anyone ever got a massive log file that's got, like, I don't know, 15,000 lines in it, and you only really care about the thing it writes out every 10th line? If you've Googled, if you've wrote code in the past to do all this automation, you're going to have a basic understanding of the syntax, and you're going to be able to go on Google and find some information and write that program. But I think that only happened once people's mindsets change that automation is just a tool, and we can use our knowledge and experiences we've learned writing automated checks to create all sorts of tools that really support our testing. If anyone's done RST, Michael Bolton and James back, they're often always pulling out, James particularly is always loading up Perl or Perl clip and doing all sorts of crazy stuff with strings to test his application with. And he's realized that he can do that because he knows how to use Perl. But I've done a similar thing with .NET, just to create a little simple test tool that just copies something to the clipboard for me. But again, it's not complicated code. People's code they write for their automated checks is far more complicated than that. But they just don't think of doing it because their focus is always to produce an automated check. Whereas if you focus on just producing automation, you open up a lot more avenues for yourself. So, a bit of a conclusion. As I said, automation is just a tool for me. I changed my mindset on this about a year ago, and I am now able to create all the tools, a few of those examples there, and they do speed up my testing. They allow me to test more scenarios, say, faster because I can eliminate some of the legwork to get to a certain step. Or I don't have to go into the database and produce loads of data that I'm going to need later. I can use code that's already existing. And then the other, the key bits of information we've got is that, tools support testers, they do not replace them. We need to start realizing that, again, tools, automation, they're there to support you. They're not there to replace you. Going to be a bit early, but the final thing is that I didn't know the original person who said this. Someone else told me in the community, but a fool with a tool is still a fool. So this is my point about automation's there to support you. You guys are skilled testers. Think about how you're going to use this automation, how you're going to use these tools. Don't just write automation that sits in the corner and ticks along. You really need to use it to support yourselves, support your testing, really allow yourselves to really focus on testing a lot more than just thinking that, it will force you to think about the testing you're doing and how automation can help you, not how this part of the testing can be automated and this part over here I carry on testing. You are doing testing and you're just using parts of automation to support your efforts. Yeah, and is that it? Yeah, that's all I have to say. So I'm a bit early. 4 minutes early? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Testing, yep, it's working. We have half an hour of open season, so questions. First, let me lay down the mic, and then I will write down the numbers. $160. Please stand.
So part of the problem here is getting people to change their mind about how they look at this, how they look at automation, and to look at it as a tool and not this thing that's supposed to be all-encompassing. How do you change people's minds and get them to see it as a tool and get them to come up with ideas for ways to use it as a tool rather than this crutch or this replacement for testing?
So I think the way of changing people's mindsets in that instance is, like I said, when we need to educate the testers that when like I said, the automation is providing you very little information in the form of a check you're just getting information that you've already had. Testers don't want to do that. They want to provide new information. So when we've come to try and educate let's say, I've had discussions with management about this, and I've used those definitions. I've even sent this several blog posts on James Back's blog. I've sent them to them, and basically just tried to explain to them that they really want information to help them make new decisions. And automation in that format, in a check, is not going to help them. Whereas if you give a tester more tools to really aid them and support them in the jobs they're doing, you can really get a lot more value out of them. In terms of the testers themselves, again, I've observed testers and watched them work and gone, no, why have you just spent 15 minutes creating data in the database? Oh, well, I need it for this scenario that I want to run. Again, and then just show them very quickly that they can use a very quick application that already exists to create that. But again, I'm using this in the places where I've been, where we've already got all that in place. If you haven't already got all that in place, it's probably potentially easier because you'll design your automation in a way knowing that you can utilize it. So all those 4 sections, if you built them as independent tools, then obviously just putting a test framework over the top allows you to bring them all together to be this all-encompassing checking. But if you think about it away from that, then you're going to have more options. I think the other danger as well is that people, they try and find other tools to do this for them, whereas they probably already have a lot of this stuff. Like people go and buy expensive SQL data injection tools. You can go and fill my database with all this information. You've already going to have that in your source code for your checks, so you can just utilize it. So again, it's just showing people, give them examples. But that's why I think it's when people are outside, when you haven't got someone in your organization who's seeing that, I think that's going to be the difficult bit for us. That's why I think as testers we need to start viewing automation as this, and hopefully people will write more about how they've created new tools to really support their testing.
Okay. Start a new thread, but this one comes from the audience somewhere around the world.
Okay.
I have 4 questions, by the way, so I picked them in randomly order, but there is one person who has 2 questions, so I give him the first one. Toby the tester, you know him?
Toby, yeah.
Okay. This question. Are better checks one output from testing? He says an example. We find information about the product that can then made into unit checks.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Simon, the first bit? Oh, I'll read it. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I think I tried to briefly touch on it in the talk. So the question is more, do we get better checks? Do we end up with better checks as an output from doing testing? But like I said earlier, I don't think you can write a check, especially from a UI or an API point of view, without doing some testing in the first place. Because you're gonna have to call it, you're gonna have to see what it feeds you back. Ideally, you should replay the check you've written if you're doing the UI, if you're doing any UI automation, just to make sure it works. And I reckon a lot of people have probably found bugs in applications as they're writing their automation. I was speaking to John Stevenson, and he was saying that that they rather write their checks as the next step. And I think that's probably potentially a good way of going about it. Do some automation first, and then go and update your checks and see what ifs. Some of them might no longer be valid, but you'll never know to remove them if you haven't had a look at the application first.
Okay, I have a follow-up question on this one, 160.
Can't you potentially use checks to help drive design? To say, I'm going to create this piece of automation to check for this. We need to design our software to have that there so that when we check for it, it's there.
Oh, definitely.
Isn't that possible?
Yeah, I think, well, I've come to write automation, especially from a UI point of view before, where the code's just too hard to automate. And we're going back to about using your time efficiently. You spend a lot of time trying to find ways to make some kind of complicated AJAX call work, or try and find an element that doesn't have an ID or a name. And you really don't want to revert to using a massive long XPath. But again, that's where I think it's important to get developers involved earlier on, even potentially writing a lot of this checks for us. I think it was Michael who told me that you said that testing anyway can only ever say that something can work. But I think developers need to start saying, proving their code can work before they check it in or say they're done. And they can do that themselves by writing a check. And I bet any developer who struggles to automate an area of the application, he will go and change that code to make it easier for him. But we can prompt that as well. If we need an ID, adding an ID is not complicated. I've done it myself in some organizations, but it shouldn't be that hard. And again, using the time that automation can give you, if you build relationships with your developers, that will also become easier. So you'll be able to, try and make it easier to provide checks. And yeah, it would influence the design. And I've had developers who start including IDs automatically. I've had developers who come up to me and go, would you like an ID on this? And yeah, it helps a lot.
Same thread, number 67.
Yeah. Along the same lines, like Trisha's keynote yesterday, where she spoke a lot about how developers need to hold the responsibility for creating the checks. I was just looking for your opinion on how you thought, like, her talk kind of relates to this.
I think it is coming closer. I think in terms of checks, like I said, I would be of the preference of developers creating these checks now, but on the basis that there's already been some kind of upfront discussion about what it is we are going to check. So in a few places, I've worked in a place where in the planning session or pre-planning sessions, as we're discussing the stories that are coming up, the developers have got all the code up on GitHub and they're thinking about what they're going to change and what they're going to do. And then we have the prompted discussion about what we're going to test. So what we did there was we had these lengthy discussions about what we're going to test, and I could get ideas from the code, but then we could talk about what we're going to automate. And in that space, they then went, oh, well, that's going to be quite tricky. Do we really need to do that? Or should we just test it? So is that, yeah? Okay,
I'll pick another one from the web audience. This one is from Neil Studd. What would you say to a product owner who sees automation as the only worthwhile form of testing?
To a product owner, I would probably, someone mentioned earlier about the best way of educating people is to go and do it wrong and then let them suffer the pain of what happens. But no, I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably just sit down to them and actually show them what's going on. So go run them through the process of me going, right, this is what I want to write a check for. I've thought about it, I've designed it, I've gone through it, I've tested it, and it's fine. And I then put all that into some code. No more, like I said, very little information apart from it's still the same is ever going to come out of that. So you end up with just no new information. And as a product owner, they need that. They need that to know what their next features they should be thinking about, or if their product's releasable. Just a single approach to automation is only ever going to prove that your application can work in the ways that the automation's doing it. And most of that time, it's a very happy stroll through the application because no one wants to make their automation that complicated. So in that instance, really, they're just going to prove that people, perhaps, they're going to have good knowledge that they automate their product. You can go from end to end. But as we all know, users don't use the product. as we would write automation on a UI. They've got all sorts of things going on at the same time and clicking around. So I would tell them, I would educate them on the value of testing and how we can really work closer together to produce masses of information to really help them. Yeah.
I have one question from the audience, but I still have two from the web people. So people over here in New York, raise your green card, please, because we still have some time left over. Okay, another one from Zeko ID 55. Instead of replacing testers, do you think some jobs become dangerously streamlined, that is, just looking after the automation?
I think that's where some of the really good design patterns that I tried to mention in that ideal design for a check. So if you don't use some of these patterns, say in your automation, and all your scripts are just huge, long, lengthy scripts, you are going to spend a lot of your time maintaining those, and it's going to eat up into a lot of your time. If you think that you can only do automated check-in, or that's going to be your only approach, you're going to be spending even more time doing that. So I think there is a danger that some people do spend a lot of their time focusing on automation, but I think it can be avoided with solid approaches to writing code. Without plugging myself even more, there's loads of examples on my blog about writing solid design patterns for automation. But no, I think people will spend more time on writing automation, but I don't think it should eat into too much of your time. But if you are using the automation to do more with than just checks, you're hopefully going to have a more reward from it, or it's going to support your testing more. I don't mean that in the sense of an ROI. I don't believe in automation having an ROI, but I mean in the sense of that you're going to get more value out of the code you've written.
248, new thread.
It's actually going to turn into a bit of a continuation, unintentionally. What percentage of your time in a given month do you spend supporting automation as opposed to using it?
I try and really limit the number of checks that I create. I don't really want to, like I said, I don't like the word happy path, but I try and write one that, or at least we try and cover every flow through the application, but after that we tend not to do many more. Like, I've seen people's frameworks where they're checking for every single error message that logging can return. Whereas if they broke down the code, they'll realize that it's the same code, just sending different text back. But in terms of my time, in a given week, probably like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 hours if the product's continuously flowing. Like I said, we want to be spending most of my time testing and providing value information instead of just maintaining code. So yeah, probably about 3 or 4 hours.
New thread 132, Michael.
Hey, Richard.
Hey.
One of the things you said was that automation is good for really only replacing mindless morons. And when we're doing the BBST Foundations class and we're discussing oracles, there are actually two things they mention that have no oracles. One is the incompetent human, and the other is automation. Do you think that that's the defining factor right there, is that they don't have oracles, so they can't be what you would consider a test? Because they're making those algorithmic decisions that we tell them?
Yeah, so because like I said, they can't think, so they can only, well, I do believe that they do have one oracle, and it's the oracle that you've coded into that algorithm. Yeah, it's very small. So I think that they are mindless because they can't learn. They only learn from what you tell them. Like we said, every time you have to update it, it's like your automation died. It goes, oh, I have no idea what's going on anymore. I don't know what this is. Then you have to go and tell it again what it is. So yeah, I think it is the lack that they just can't think. And if you're going to go down the route, I've heard some people saying that, coding several oracles into your automation, but then you're just making it more complicated for no reason. Just think of the ones that are going to add you the most value. Like I said, probably the happy flows through the application. Another word I've often used for that is the flows that are going to make the business money. I know the applications in general do, but there's sometimes specific flows that if they don't work, then your business is going to be in trouble. So I think they are mindless because they can't think and they can't work that out. you have to tell them.
Okay, I have one question left, but still 40 minutes, so people everywhere over here and around the world, please send in your question or raise a green card, because we still have some time left over.
10 minutes.
Another one from the audience abroad. From Toby the Tester. Should TDD actually be CDD, check-driven development?
Oh dear. We had a big debate about TDD in the pub. So I'm no expert on TDD. I've worked in places that have used it a lot. But I think TDD in that way it's slightly, this is being recorded, but it's slightly different in that you've got, so if I was doing TDD, it's meant to be more of a, am I coding the right thing is what I've interpreted it as. So if I'm writing some code that's going to tell me whether I've done something right or wrong, at that time I would probably see it as a tool to help me test it, but a tool to help me code. So in that instance, you're coding, but you're also testing that the code you've just written. So for me there, at that time, no, it would still be testing, but once it's complete, yeah, it's just a check at the end of the day. Once you've done it, it's not going to learn, it's not going to evolve, it's just going to tell you when you've, again, like we said earlier, it's going to tell you when something that you thought was factually still correct is no longer correct. So they are checks in a way, but I think the principles behind test-driven development is more along the lines of writing a test to help you design better code, and that you are indeed coding the right thing, or being the right thing is in that what someone else told you was the right thing. So no, I think they do become checks, but I think that's not really what's intended to be behind TDD.
Okay. Still have one question from, oh wait, I see a yellow card. Follow up. Carry on to 35.
Just shout, Josh.
I will throw the mic.
No problem. The other aspect of TDD that I touched on a little bit on Twitter in response to this actually is that in the TDD world, or in TDD, you're not just writing unit checks or tests, whatever you want to call it. You're using it to write, you're really testing the design of your software because you're using it to write software that is testable or checkable. In a TDD world, you can't write non-testable code because then you won't actually be able to write your unit checks, unit tests against those. I think that's a key component that gets lost in the TDD world. People think TDD and they think I'm just going to write unit tests. That's not what it is in any stretch.
I would agree. You shouldn't be writing them at the end either. If you're, there wouldn't be unit tests. If that's more of like a thing you stick on at the end, like a bit of a plaster to try and protect yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
160, new thread.
Do you mind going maybe into a little bit of technical detail about how you implement your driver factories?
Yeah. So there is a quite lengthy post on my blog about the driver factory approach. But essentially, the detail behind it is having some kind of config that can be easily put into a CI to control the driver that you want to use. So in the driver factory, it just produces, so in this instance, it's WebDriver, so it just produces a type of iWebDriver interface, which then my checks can utilize, or my tool that I'm using at the time, or whatever I'm using it for, can then use. So it's mainly just a way of, like I said, your checks shouldn't care about the driver that's being used. So therefore, separate those concerns, have a driver factory that reads some form of config, produces you the right driver, and then reports it back. And in the web and mobile space, there's a lot of things you can do that you probably need to separate the concerns. So things like Firefox, if you want to use profiles or you want to add extensions to your Firefox instance that you're running. So if one example there is, if anyone's ever tries to use Wave for accessibility, Alistair Scott, who wrote a blog about you can control Wave by keyboards. So you add in the extension, you build a Firefox, you launch it, you press a keyboard shortcut, and then all the HTML gets edited actually in the DOM with where there's accessibility errors, and then you can read that back with WebDriver. So that's one of the reasons why if you separate it out into a factory, you can control all that away from your check framework, because it'll just get polluted otherwise, and you end up, I don't know, I've seen people in there, the infamous before test, just loads of code in there that creates my driver for me. Every test has to do that, every check has to do that, so move it across.
Okay, I have a question from the web audience, Mr. RW Testing. Can off-the-shelf test automation tools from vendors still act as good tools, just not in their advertised way?
I haven't used any for a very long time, but I couldn't see why not. There's all, people often say that a craftsman can use a tool any way he needs to because he knows what he wants to achieve and he just finds a way of using a tool. I couldn't find a hammer the other day, so I used the mallet that's in the kitchen for like smashing chicken to pieces, but it worked. But again, some of the vendor tools, it will depend because a lot of those are driven from the top down. So the first thing you do is go well, in these instances it's new test. So the first thing you do is click new test, and then you're already in this world of creating a test. Whereas when you are going down the code route, you've got free reign of what you want to do. To be honest, I'm a big fan of people using code, only because it's so more flexible. As we've just discovered, you can control pretty much everything. And when you are trying to say this is what I want to do as a human and put it into some code, you really need that flexibility of being able to do what you want to do, not what the tool constrains you to do.
Okay, I have a follow-up question by not a number.
Marcus.
Yeah, I'm a free man. So you mentioned that as a craftsman, you find a tool and make use out of it, and if you can't find the right tool, you try to use some tool. So my question would be, as a follow-up on that, considering testing as a craft, and we are all testing craftspersons, what are the tools of our trade? Do you have an answer for that?
Well, I think the main one is obviously our brain. Like I said, the brain's the key to it. Like I said, I'm using my brain to think of things I want to do and translate them into code, which enables me to produce some more tools for automation. I think the way we're going, though, I think tools are going to continue to play a heavy part, but I don't want to say there's certain instances of tools. It's just the fact that we know we're going to have to create some form of tools to support our testing. I think it's very hard. Well, it's probably, like I said, you're always using your brain, but like you're always going to use some form of tool as you're testing, even if it's simply pen and paper. I always say my favorite tool is pen and paper, because it gives me free reign to draw whatever I want to. I'm not constrained by the tool, and I think that's the same when I say that I'd rather write automation in code, because again, I'm not constrained by anything. So yeah, is that okay?
Okay, new thread 116, Stephen.
Hi, Richard. Great talk. Have you ever worked in an organisation that wants metrics? So we want 80% of all our test cases automated. If not, what advice would you give to people who currently do work in such organisations?
Well, like I said, you need to educate those on the difference between the testing that you're doing and what a check would be. But I'm guessing you could, if you've gone that, I want to make these 20 checks and that you automate those checks, then you could just go to them and say you had 100% check coverage of the checks I wanted to create. Whereas you can't really, people often go, oh, I've got 80% of my testing automated. Well, testing in that sense can't be measured. But if you've said up front that you're going to write 20 checks and these are the checks I'm going to create, then yeah, you could report against that. But the other danger is they're always going to be changing. You're always going to be creating new ones. And that's why I would just rather argue that automation in the form of any tool you create or as a check is just there to support your testing. So why not have them, they should be analyzing you on your testing, not the fact that you've separated them off, because you shouldn't separate them off. They're all still under testing. It's just you've decided to automate your check-in. And as we said, check-in is still part of testing. So don't try and measure them separately. But if you do have to go down the route of saying, I've used my analysis of this application and I've come up with the thing that we should create 10, 20 checks, and then we're going to try and achieve that, and then report on that instead.
Okay, follow-up question, 132.
We actually ran into that where I work. We were given the goal one year of 100% automation coverage. So what we did, we broke it down into what can and should be automated, which goes along with what you're saying. You know, come up with a list of here's the things we're going to automate, and we're going to automate that percent of them. So we kind of addressed it that way. One problem we had, though, was after we did this automation, it sat there and never got used again. So.
Well, that's what, yeah, I think I probably skipped over it, but one of the important things if you do write any automated check is to always review it. Like I said, you might not always want to run them all. If you can run them all fast, then there's probably no harm in doing it, but there is the harm in that if you need to think about which ones you want to use and are they going to help you with your testing. Because, you know, sometimes I think I've had it where I've not ran a check, and the next time we've run all of them, there's a failure. But I've then gone back and gone, well, why did I not think of running that check? Or what if I learn, or why didn't I test that area? So I can use it to educate me. But again, I've worked in some places where it takes 8 hours, and waiting 8 hours just wasn't feasible.
Follow-up 235, Josh.
So we actually have an extreme problem. We set a goal 5 years ago that we wanted to get to 100% test automation, right? So we now have nearly 1 million tests.
Yeah.
It takes us about a week and a half if we wanted to run a full suite. And we have more testers than we had 5 years ago, and every single one of them is spending almost 100% of their time maintaining the test suite, right? Management has finally seen the failure in this. So in our case, it took doing what they wanted and failing to get the change, right? And now we're starting to pare back on that and to bring people in that aren't doing test automation and to reintroduce more of the human actual testing. So
I think I think we're seeing that a lot more, and hopefully we can now, you know, use some of the fact that we can use automation. A lot of your framework that you've said they've spent ages maintaining is probably of really use to a tester. He wants to sit down and do some testing with the aid of some really good tools, and your framework's probably full of them. They've just been used, and they're just being used as an approach, whereas automation is just not an approach. It's not an approach to testing.
Okay, at the last minute I got 2 new questions, so we will give them the microphone, but I will close now for new green cards. 76.
Thank you. I'm wondering, because from your talk and the Appium talk yesterday, it seems like there's a little bit of hesitancy to use off-the-shelf tools, and maybe I'm misunderstanding. What is wrong with using a tool that a company has created that you can pay for and use and be up and running within a day and actually do useful stuff from it?
I wouldn't say there was anything wrong with it. I've just spent a lot of my career in the web space, and the best tool in the web space has always been some part of the Selenium project. RC was the best tool when it was around, and now it's been replaced by WebDriver. But if anyone is working in the web space, WebDriver is soon going to be hopefully a W3C standard. It's well on its way to doing so. Microsoft have started taking WebDriver seriously, so it's now going to be, they're now looking after the WebDriver code for Internet Explorer, which has always been quite cumbersome in the Selenium project. But I say I'm not against it. I just, in the web space, that tool's free. So why would we use any of our budget to go and pay for a tool? However, I have met a few people who do Windows applications, and the open source tools just sometimes don't cut it. So they've often gone and bought some off the shelf. But again, it depends on your context. But if there's anything in the web or mobile, and at the moment, I would always push people to open source tools. If you get to a desktop application, I think they are lacking in an area because people don't focus on them as much.
Well, I guess my question really came out of mobile because, you know, since I've been in this Appium tool, I've poked around at Appium a little bit, and I'm finding it, with respect to, I don't know, the Appium people might be here, lacking. And maybe I should sit down with them and go through it a little bit. But I'm finding it a little bit lacking compared to maybe 2 or 3 or 5 commercial tools I've been exposed to.
Okay.
And maybe that I want to sit with them for a bit.
It's also, oh, go on.
Why interrupt?
Go on, your red card.
Why do you flash your red card? Why?
Because I wanted to just clarify
It's good. One moment. Yeah, that's my first red card today.
So to clarify the statement about third-party tools, it's more that it's sold from an angle that it's going to solve all your problems and it's going to do all your testing for you. And that's what I sort of meant to be wary of. Not so much don't use them, they don't have value, but they aren't going to test your product for you, and they're going to provide you a very limited set of automatic tests or checks, right? And so I just wanted to clarify that was sort of where I was going with the tool. Not so much they're all evil, don't use them, but they are sold as though they're a panacea to all your mobile testing woes, and all you have to do is upload your app and magically all the bugs will be spit out of them. And it's sort of the sales of them that I think misleads people into using them incorrectly.
It's probably the sales of them to the management as well. So normally it's at a higher level than the test team sometimes. So if they are getting that sales pitch and you realize you can't use it that way, is it you who looks bad, or is it the tool that's costing them loads of money, so it must be so good?
No, I think I have to cut you off.
Okay.
So I guess I just wanted to clarify that because it seemed like I was getting a bit anti-purchase bias, and
Yep.
if I'm wrong, I'm actually happy about that. You know, of someone who's seeing that, because I think as an industry, and I've spoken with some other people who, you know, I guess like the fact that there isn't a commercial, or the commercial aspect of CAST is a little bit lower than other ones I've been to. And I will say I like that a little bit, but I sort of, there's places and there's tools available that can get you started a lot sooner. And for people here who, to me, is like haven't started, and I think I can pick up a tool, I could purchase it today or get a free one, I can actually get useful things out of that tool today. Like within an hour, I can get useful work out of that tool, and I pay, let's say, 20 grand for it. And I think, you know, there's a lot of benefit of doing that. And I think I want to pipe up because I want to say I don't want to discourage people that are thinking about going automation and then they install something that like an open source one, which has a lot of benefit, but they get intimidated because this is hard to start off with. And that's where they stop, because it's not easy to do, as opposed to a commercial tool that has support and things like that, where they can actually get started and start on their way. And then once they hit a certain plateau, then I think it makes a lot more sense to put in an open source tool that can do certain things that are better.
Thank you very much, because I have to close now.